View from the Gutters, episode 38. Welcome to View from the Gutters, the comic book podcast where each episode we discuss a collected edition, trade paperback, or graphic novel, and then recommend and vote on the book for the next episode. Warning: the discussion portion of this show has massive spoilers for that book. On this episode, we discuss The Authority, Volume 1, and, to skip ahead to the recommendation section, skip to 5360.
Is it 37 or 38?
It's 38.
38.
This is episode 38.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Welcome to View from the Gutters.
Yeah, episode 38. I'm Andrew Chard.
I'm Joe Preddy.
I'm Adam Panshin.
I'm Tobiah Panshin.
I'm Matt McGinnis.
And I'm Cade Reynolds.
I feel you missed a golden opportunity to say, I'm Matt Panshin. But you could have,
Well, you could have
I don't have
started
the beard
that, and
to
then
back
they would
that
have been
up.
so confused.
I really should have done
That's
that.
the Russian genetics.
I
Yeah.
don't have a beard to back it up.
So
Okay.
I think I've mentioned Adam on the mics before. He's my
Yeah.
brother, and he's joining us to talk about The Authority.
Special
Yeah.
guest star. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, first time podcaster.
All right,
With
well,
us, so.
Joe, you pitched The Authority.
Did you?
I fucking hate this book. Like, I would never... No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I did pitch it, and I love it. It's one of my favorite things to read. And I think this is definitely for some... I would pitch this for somebody... I would definitely recommend this for somebody who liked things like Invincible, things that are superheroes, but don't kind of... They're not concerned with this noble image. They're more concerned with getting things done. And I really think the thing I love the most about The Authority is that there's a point in this trade where the Earth is being invaded by this alternate Earth. And they're like, well, we've repelled the invasion, but that's not enough. And they're like, well, we'll go and kill the main bad guy. And they're like, that's not enough either. Like, we need to take care of this.
Yeah.
And that's it. It's like, yeah, we do. Because if we leave them there and they come back, every person they kill is our bad because we did not end the problem. And as much as I love... I think it happens... I think Batman is kind of the biggest offender here. But,
I think that while you can see Invincible as a successor to The Authority, and it exists because The Authority blazed that trail... Mm-hmm. I'm not necessarily sure that I would recommend this to somebody who likes Invincible necessarily.
Well, I think
there's a common line between the two of them because they both kind of go, that thing that you just did or the thing that you didn't do, that has consequences which are going to come back and you're going to have to deal with that. And The Authority was really the first thing that dealt with that, but I don't know that common through line between the two of them necessarily makes them
I'm not saying that. I really think, and it's funny that we're having this conversation because I think we are perfect examples of this. Just because a person likes one thing doesn't mean they're going to like another.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's regardless. If somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, I just read Invincible. I really like it," I'd be like, "Well, you should check out The Authority."
Yeah, and I think that
because you'll know whether an issue or not whether that's going to be something you like or not.
Right, and they have that theme of, this is, how do you deal with the consequences? Okay, well, I just locked my bad guys up in Arkham versus we're just going to kill them, is something that is handled well in a lot of comic books. Like, that thread goes through a lot of them.
The thing is that I don't think that, we're just going to kill our villains is necessarily the core operating mechanic of The Authority. It's what people took from it.
Yeah,
and I think that was a
absolutely.
mistake to a certain extent because I think that there's so much more going on there.
It's
Right.
absolutely not.
But it's how you deal with your consequences.
And this is my thing. We talk a lot about, and this is just a slight aside. We talk a lot about recommending things to people from the point of view of we want people to like them. I don't necessarily think that's entirely useful. I think recommending people to books so that they can find out what they don't like, so that they can find things they like, is just as important. Because right now, if I went into a comic book store and I was like, "Oh, what's this all about?" and they'd be like, "Well, it's kind of like Preacher." I'd be like, "Oh, I'm probably not going to be too interested in that." Or knowing maybe God forbid you don't like Warren Ellis, so you're going to be able to stay away. But you're not going to know that if you're not interested in its work. Is it as important as finding stuff you like? Probably not. But I think it can help you find more stuff that you like.
if they say, I like Invincible, and you say, okay, then you should read this, and then if they come back and say, oh, I didn't like that, then you now have a place to go from.
Yeah,
can
Absolutely,
say-
and you can have a conversation. So, like, well, now that you have these two contrasting things, what did you like about what did you not like about the Authority? Because then I can figure out, oh, you like this part? Well, let's go check out this.
Well, I think that's two different. You're conflating two different statements. One of which is, I liked Invincible. What else would I like? Versus, I liked Invincible. What else should I read?
And that's
well, I don't know. I come from a place. Sorry, Adam, you can go ahead. I was just going to say I like both, and so it's like helpful to learn like what parts of both.
Right,
well,
I
for,
think that those are two
for me
different
at least, the Authority, and if I can segue into saying what I thought of it, I think the Authority is a lot less interesting on its own than it is as sort of a historical, almost, telling you where comics were and where they're going. Because the Authority in isolation, it's, oh, there's a lot of big action with the genre safety protocols disabled. And with a surface reading of that, you end up into what later writers turned it into with the debauched Celebrity Authority. And
Ultimates to some extent.
well, the same person,
Yeah.
Mark
fucking Miller.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Mark fucking Miller.
with Authority, I mean, I was reading it pretty much at the time in college, and to understand it, you have to really understand the two important contexts that this was specifically a response to. And one of those was Warren Ellis's Stormwatch, which Authority is really a epilogue continuation of. And through Ellis's Stormwatch run, the characters who were part of a UN superhero squad were constantly running into political brick walls. Well, like the first villain in the first arc of Authority, that's somebody Stormwatch fought, only they couldn't deal with him. And what they said then, and what came up repeatedly through the run, was, we don't have the authority to do this. We can only go so far. We don't know who does have the authority to go in and put a, just do a scorched earth final solution to this. I mean, poor phrasing, but to put an end on it. And the authority was the answer. Who has the authority? We have the authority. We have the power, and therefore the responsibility and the authority to go in and deal with these things and not be held up.
Yeah. The very first, one of the very early lines in the Authority is I come from a higher authority, essentially.
Yeah.
This isn't Stormwatch anymore. We're here to get rid of the bureaucracy.
Well,
She basically says that she only has to answer to a higher authority. That's the only person that's going to stop.
They don't. It's not that they have the authority. It's that they are the fucking authority. That they're stating. They're not asking anybody for permission. They're stating, we will do what we must.
And the other context you have to know for this is happening right in the middle of Morrison's JLA run.
Yeah, exactly.
Where Morrison was hitting a lot of notes of, JLA as the new gods, the new pantheon, and, getting into all his mystical stuff.
Well, he's doing the opposite thing in the new JLA. He's building up the nobility of the JLA.
Well, yeah, the very first 5-issue run that Morrison does on that 96, 93?
95.
Yeah,
95, yeah.
That run is, they're basically up against a very authority-style super group from space that is essentially we're going to use all of our powers to do everything we can to make the world a utopia, and we're going to break the rules if we have to, because this is what you should have done. You're the JLA. Why aren't you making the world a better place? And so he's I looked it up right after I read this, because I wonder if Morrison is responding to this. But it's the other way around.
Yes, this is Ellis's response to, no, the JLA aren't gods. These are gods. They live in a celestial castle that's invisible to the normal world.
It touches all places on
their
Earth.
arrival is a terrible and awesome thing, following great disasters.
Is there a single story in this trade where a place they show up doesn't get utterly destroyed?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of Kaizen Gamora being I just wanted to have fun.
This is Ellis saying, these are what superheroes as gods are. They are the authority. They answer to no one. They live in a celestial palace and come down to smite those who would do evil.
Right.
And, as I said, a lot of people, Mark Miller foremost among them, totally missed the point and turned them into the debauched celebrity authority, which is what often happens with these. I mean, I hate to use the word deconstruction because it's so overused, but a lot of these genre redefining moments like this, like Watchmen, like Evangelion.
Yeah.
People go, oh, wow, that's so amazing. And then they imitate the surface details while missing the point of what it was saying about the genre.
Yeah, I often talk about sci-fi and say, you missed the story for the lightsabers. And it's like,
Which is
there's
really
so
funny
much more
because
depth
I'm
there.
totally picturing Warren Ellis and Grant Morrison fighting with lightsabers.
Well, they should.
I want to steal and paraphrase something that Adam said to me when we were talking about this a couple of days ago. The Authority is the middle of an arc that begins with Stormwatch, and the third part of that arc isn't invincible, it's planetary.
Yep.
That's where this story is ultimately leading up
Which is
to, and this is
something
how
else,
Warren Ellis basically concludes that arc. But it's in a very different place from where Invincible goes, because Invincible kind of goes up to that edge, and instead of jumping off, it kind of backs away and says, how can I go back to what I was doing in a better way?
Well, I understand that Invincible is the Superman mythos. It's Smallville if Smallville was about Superman and not about Clark Kent. Regardless of the quality of the show, I could never watch it.
We all looked at Cade because we know
but
Cade
Cade,
likes it.
Cade likes it. I have a lot of respect for Cade. The thing, I don't want that to be construed as a negative statement.
Yeah, it's not a good show. I'll say it.
But
I wouldn't say that it's not a good show. It's not a superhero.
That's
show.
fair. That's totally fair.
It's operating on entirely different genres.
Invincible is the story of somebody who wants to be the noble Superman character and is finding his way, kind of stumbling through it. And, he makes gains. The Authority is about what happens when the Superman way doesn't work, and you have to fucking get down there and kick some ass.
And a lot of the Invincible side characters are very much more in the mindset of the Authority, where it's like, look, we made some shitty choices and we did some things you wouldn't have done, but this is the real world, kid. Grow up.
Well,
and even his little brother, is in that mindset too, where it's like, fuck, who cares? We kill people,
There's
whatever.
some
It's like, what, we
crazy
blow up this planet? There's like a million more.
Yeah, and it's really Invincible, railing against the ideas that come out of the Authority, in my mind.
And that's why I'm saying it's a retreat.
Yeah, and I totally
But
understand.
again, I think that's a lot of people missing the point of the Authority. The point of the Authority is not, we kick ass, we take names, we don't hold back. The point was them saying, we have the power, and therefore we have the authority and the responsibility. I mean, that's what Joe was referencing with we can't just smack these people around until they go away and call it a day. We have the authority and the responsibility to put an end to this threat for good.
Well, and I think I mean, this is getting a little bit ahead of where we read, but I really do think that there are strands of that in Millar's run. I think that he does get in there because he replaces the Authority with pretenders, and that's what they do. Is they are doing the same thing, but they are riotous. They don't care. They have no responsibility.
And the other thing is, it's kind of in my mind, it reminds me of the Miracle Man vein of if you have all this power, you are owed you're the only one with this power in Miracle Man, not in this book. It's not only your responsibility, but it's your duty to make the world a better place. You don't have a choice. You have this power, and you have to do good, and sometimes that means making shitty choices. Right. And the Authority, the most human character in this book to me is the Engineer, because she doesn't necessarily love being part of the Authority, but she knows that she's doing more good there than she would be doing in her lab, and she's the human eyes into that group for me, where she had to make the hard choice and go, sometimes bad things happen, and sometimes I'm the cause of that, but I'm doing more good here.
And the other thing is the Authority is still set firmly in a superhero world.
Right.
They're not saying, well, I have this awesome authority, so I have to go out and solve social unrest and racism. It's here's a supervillain with his army of clone super soldiers blowing up cities.
Yeah, and alien, alien invasions.
Yeah, well, extra dimensional invasions. Flying saucers are shooting up a city.
Yeah.
It is a totally superhero genre thing. It's just taking off a few of the limiters and going full bore with it. And it's, you keep bringing up Invincible and other things that, took it other places and took it as an excuse to leave the superhero genre. And I don't think the Authority works the same way once you're trying to apply overwhelming unilateral force to more delicate problems.
Yeah, and it's something that I think that a fan of Invincible would draw from this book is, this is Invincible's answer in the book even doesn't always seem like the best answer. It's just he is firmly stuck in this tradition
Invincible
of
is
he's not going to kill.
It's definitely working on some of the same issues, like the I can't remember what they're called, but the alien race.
Terminates.
No. The green ones from the alternate dimension that's got faster time.
Oh, yeah,
the
yeah.
Phylaxians, I think.
Yeah, I don't remember the name of it.
Like, Invincible's dad fights them and beats them. And then, like, a few months later, they show up again. And they get beaten again. And they just keep showing up over and over and over again until eventually Robot and Monster Girl go to that dimension and spend, like, 700 years fixing their society so that it won't happen again. They come back, and guess what happens? It happens again in a few months.
Right.
Because time is so different there. But they keep having the same problem come up again and again and again, and they keep trying bigger and more permanent solutions, and nothing works. And it keeps running up against that wall. Yeah. And so it is dealing with the same situation, but it doesn't want to jump off that cliff like the Authority does, where they just go, well, fuck, we're just going to blow this dimension up because you guys are assholes and you're never going to stop.
Right.
So, yeah, there are similarities there, but there's a tonal difference that I don't think necessarily translates from one to
I think I'm going to jump in at this point and be like, I want to move on from this point because I think we're beating a dead horse at this point. I'm giving my recommendation. I'm not going to change it. If somebody came to me and
that's
said,
fine. I'm not saying I'm not saying that they won't like it. I'm saying you can't necessarily.
Let me finish.
Okay.
I'm going to take you outside and we're going to do battle after this.
Okay, that's fine.
That's just what I'm
With
saying.
lightsabers.
Okay.
I found
and you're gonna pull out your phone and play the Kirk Spock music.
Okay.
Okay.
I've got that music on my phone. So
I know you did. That's why I said you're going to do it. And so that's how we're going to settle this. But no, I think that those are some very valid points, and I'm not necessarily saying. I think it's important for me because I'm aware that things like Invincible came out of the Authority, and that's kind of what I'm. Yeah.
I think a good way to look at this is that there are differences and there are similarities, as there are with anything.
Yeah.
And so some of the things in this book will tie very well into the Invincible, and so if you liked those things, you will like Invincible. However, there are also some key differences that if you did like them in this book, you're not going to find them.
And then I think
succinctly put.
Yeah, that's a.
But since you're talking now, Kate, why don't we hear what you thought about it? Because I know that you had a specific comment you wanted to make.
I don't remember what that was, but yes, no, I did want to do a general thing. I really did like this book. It has some of my favorite characters. Like before the show, I was saying that Engineer is my favorite Green Lantern because that's basically who she is.
There was some debate as to whether she's a Green Lantern or not.
No, she was definitely a Green Lantern. The debate was whether the Doctor was more Doctor Strange or Firestorm.
Yeah.
And I think really he is both. As
I think so.
Somebody
too.
was saying.
Yeah.
I think
It's
he's
an amalgam.
Yeah.
Definitely. Character.
And actually, the character that he reminds me a lot of now is the Avatar from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Sure.
Because part of his whole shtick is that he's got a line of reincarnations going back to the first Avatar, and he can pull on their knowledge, which is something that the Doctor does quite frequently.
Yeah, he also's kind of got like a little bit of a John Constantine kind of
that's-
vibe
I
too,
think
because he's
that's
just
the
kind of
thing.
like floating through the superhero group.
This is actually something I want to talk about, but I want to let Cade finish and I want to let Matt get in here because this is
Well,
I had
wanna
already
talk too. What about me?
planned to drive the conversation in that direction.
All right.
So, I mean, the only thing that I really had wrong with this book, which isn't really wrong, is that I didn't like Jenny Sparks as much as I did when she first came out in Stormwatch. This was my first time reading Authority, and I actually hadn't read the character since she first came out in Stormwatch. And to me, it felt different than it did back then. And I don't know if that's me changing, me growing up, or if the character was different.
Well, she was, and she comments on this, that in Stormwatch, she was a lot more passive. She'd been hiding out and not wanting to get involved, and was sort of strong-armed by Bendix into playing a part and doing what she was told. And the authority is her saying, well, crap, I guess there's no one else to do it. I guess I got to put the team together and run it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they touch on that a lot in the first story arc. That like with the more power, or not power she gets, but with the more responsibility she gets, essentially the bitchier she gets, it's pretty much what they say.
Okay.
Well, and also there's the line where she's talking about, I don't want to be the leader, but bad things happen when I'm not the leader. And bad things happen when I am the leader.
Let's just see what
let's, I'd rather be the leader.
And that's actually probably one of my favorite lines in the entire Warren Ellis run on this. Because that's something that when I read so many books, and I try to put my mind in the headspace of whoever is running the show, and because you always do that. You think, well, what would I do in that situation? That's what I touch on all the time, is how do you deal with this? Man, if I make the wrong choice, shit's going to happen, and then they make the choice that seems like the right choice, and just as bad shit happens, but they come out just a little bit better than.
Well, the reluctant leader is an amazing archetype, because we can all relate to it.
Exactly.
It's exactly who you would want to have all that power is someone who knows that they don't want to use it, right? Like the last person you would want to be a politician is someone who actually wants to be a politician, because that power will corrupt you essentially. Yeah. And so if you're afraid of it, if you're like, I don't want to have this power, I'm not the reluctant hero.
I think that Sparks is interesting because she's saying, I don't want the power, but if I have the choice between doing something and doing nothing, I'm going to do something. Right. So I'm going to take the power and I'm going to go all the way with it. Yeah. And I'm not going to be reluctant about using it.
I read it too as, I could either be in charge or someone else could be in charge, and bad things are going to happen either way. Right. So I'd rather be.
And this is, like I said, Tobiah was saying middle part, and I say I look at the authority as an epilogue to Stormwatch and not a part by itself. So we're coming off of Stormwatch where Bendix was in charge and he was doing all sorts of horrible, evil shit and trying to be the puppet master in charge of everything, and got everything went to hell. Right. So again, this is Ellis responding to himself and to Morrison.
Which is what I think he does the best. It's respond to himself.
Did you have more, Cade, that you wanted to say, or is that?
Oh, no, not really. I did. The only other thing I was going to say was about Jenny Sparks. Is I saw some parallels between her and Spider Jerusalem that I hadn't before, and
the Ellis hard bastard character.
Yes,
Yeah, the loving bastard.
What?
The loving hard bastard, because underneath it all, Spider Jerusalem is a good person.
I read, I think my first introduction to Warren Ellis was his Excalibur run, which I don't know if anybody's read, but that's when he was, to my knowledge, when he was first turning it big in Marvel, and he introduced Peter Wisdom, which was the first Warren Ellis hard bastard character, and ever since, almost every time I read a Warren Ellis thing, there's there's the Peter Wisdom character.
He loves his hard
the
bastard.
Guy, Desolation Jones.
Jones.
Science Jerusalem.
He loves that hard bastard. But it's, I think a lot of people have that. Rucka has his female Marlowe. And
I think that everybody has those elements to their story writing that constantly recur, and that's what gives them a particular voice.
Yeah.
I mean, Grant Morrison wouldn't be Grant Morrison if crazy head trippy metafictional shit didn't happen.
Yeah,
all
right.
the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. God.
And sometimes it's more restrained than others. In Batman, it's not completely restrained, but more restrained than say The Filth.
Well, yeah.
Okay, all right. I have literally had drug trips that were more restrained than The Filth. All right.
This is
Seriously.
what I'm saying. Like, it wouldn't be Warren Ellis if there wasn't a hard bastard in there somewhere.
Absolutely. And the cool thing, this actually segues into something I really want to talk about, which is the characters, starting with Jenny Sparks, who fucking Warren Ellis has a whole mythology based on. Like, Jenny Sparks is Jenny Sparks because she's the spirit of the 20th century. Before her, there was Jenny Steam, and before her, there was another Jenny. And then Jenny Sparks is succeeded by Jenny Quantum. And there's this whole mythology thing that he gets into later on, and I think it's in The Authority when he talks about it. But Warren Ellis has always been, and he does it again in a very similar way with Planetary.
Oh, yeah,
and
the
Millennium
Century
Babies.
Babies.
Century Babies. Yeah. It's like, I mean, he's obsessed with this idea of, like, this kind of spirit of an idea encapsulated in a person. And I think
It was also going into the setup of having the different historical genres, like 20 pulp, 50s noir, being things that actual characters have gone through, and that goes back to what's his name on Supreme?
You mean Alan Moore?
Yes, Alan Moore on Supreme was, as far as I know, the first guy doing that. And
when he had like all the multiple versions of Supreme, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think that does plug into the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen to a certain extent.
Yeah, there's definitely...
Because he was playing with similar ideas.
Yeah.
Yes.
except they're much more exciting.
I'll always defend.
You ought to get before we tangent again. You should sound off.
Yeah, you know,
Before we stop us before we tangent again.
It's like Quantum Leap. We're gonna tangent jump.
Only you
I'm
can
be a
do
lady
it,
this
man.
you know, I'm a huge Warren Ellis fan.
Yeah.
I've talked about Warren Ellis a lot on this show. But this isn't my favorite stuff from him. It's one of my favorite of his stuff. It's probably one of my least favorite things.
So it's in the middle.
So wait. Of your favorite
Yeah.
Warren Ellis stuff, this is your least favorite of your most
Of
favorite.
the Warren Ellis stuff that isn't Warren Ellis
Of the
going up his
non-Avatar
asshole.
Warren Ellis.
of the stuff where Warren Ellis isn't going up his own asshole, this is
Yeah.
the
No,
worst of the best.
Yeah, I mean,
In your opinion.
it's
Where's
yeah.
the best? Okay.
So your top 10 Warren Ellis list would start with The Authority.
If you're ascending, going from
Yeah, if I'm
lowest
going-
to highest.
Well, your top 10 list always starts at 10. You don't start a top 10 list at 1.
You work
and
your-
then
yeah,
go
you
back.
work your way to the
There's
best.
no drama.
I do swirly patterns.
Transmet is 1 through 10, so
Yeah, no, that is correct in everything.
Well, I'm sure that you could rank the volumes of Transmetropolitan individually, so it would go from 1 to 10.
exactly that's what I'm saying.
Opposite order.
Okay, all right, we digress.
Anyway.
We are tangent.
Yeah. Kind of playing off what you were saying before. In the context of the time that it was coming out, I think that's what makes this book more relevant than what's actually here in front of us today. Working at a comic book store, I guess my mission, for lack of a better way to say it, is always to give people recommendations that they will like. I'm not going to give someone a recommendation of something that I think they'll take home and go, oh, well, I didn't like this because of this. Maybe it's just my interpretation of how to do
I
that.
think
You want them to have a good experience.
But my end result is always, I will talk to someone for 10 or 15 minutes before I give them a recommendation and try to weed out most of that.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, these are $15, $20, $30, $40, $50 books.
Yeah.
And, this is hard-earned money that people are spending.
Well, and also, you don't want them to go have a bad experience with a book and then be like, well, comics are dead to
Exactly.
me. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and make no mistake, I don't want to recommend things to people that they don't like. I'm just saying that, I think I'm big into history.
Yeah.
And so if you come to me and you're like, I like this, I'm like, you should see where that came from.
Yeah.
It's like when I
And
made
I
Matt
do it
read
to
Crisis
my-
on Infinite Earths.
Oh, my God.
Well, Matt was like, I want to read 52. What should I read? Do
Something
I
better.
I made
do I
the
need to read
horrible
anything else?
mistake of asking Charles.
And I gave him a stack of 20 books.
It was 18.
Yeah,
it was
and I was
18
like, all right,
books,
you need
starting
to read
with,
these
with
before
Crisis
you
on
read.
Infinite Earths.
Which is where you need to start.
I think that is, though, the perfect point, Matt, that this is really a historical document. I mean, we talk all the time. If you want to understand, late 80s and 90s comics, you need to read Watchmen. If you want to understand late 90s and 2000s comics,
Yeah.
you need to read Watchmen and The Authority.
Well, they call this the birth of widescreen comics,
Right.
and that term might not mean anything to you because like you're living in the very modern age of comics and you're reading the newest stuff, but it's
appropriate. I mean, there is
Yeah.
not a lot of actual plot or character development in Authority. Let's be honest. It's 3-4 issue arcs of giant global scale threat appears, blows up some cities, and then the Authority ride in and deal with it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it's like the summer event, only it's 3 of them strung in a row.
Yeah.
well, it's this how they use the splash page is what
Exactly.
really made me feel like that. Is
Oh
because
yeah, well, Bryan Hitch does an amazing. I mean, we talk about more else at great length. Bryan Hitch does an amazing job.
yeah, the
That's,
art is
that's
great.
actually what I wanted to
However,
talk about next.
I actually really disagree with his use of the splash page here, and that's
Yes.
what I think makes it for what makes it widescreen comics is those splash pages aren't used in the same way that Walt Simonson used splash pages. When Walt used the splash page, it was for emotional impact. It was like, it's what's his when he's the doctor.
Donald Blake.
Donald Blake. It's Donald Blake standing on the
Oh,
wrecked
yeah,
spaceship
that's
going,
good.
Father, why have you forsaken me, essentially. Like, you feel something for that, and he uses it as emotional impact. There are 9 panel pages of action, and then the 1 panel page of, like, here's where we punch you in the gut. And Bryan Hitch very much is the opposite of that, where it's like, the action happens on splash pages. Like, there's very static, there's a lot of them standing around looking badass, and, like, that's the widescreen.
Well, it
comics,
makes sense
right?
because the widescreens are the long shot in the
Yeah,
movie.
exactly.
It's the
It's
zoom out so you
establishing
can.
shots, yeah.
I mean, because it is the event, the splash pages are when it zooms out and you can see the city and you see the giant spaceships crashing into the skyscrapers. Where honestly, it would not have the same impact on a 9-page panel.
Exactly.
And I have complained about this at length to my family. I hate decompressed comic books where it's splash page after splash page and let's spend 3
Blackest Night.
Yeah, I just say don't read Blackest Night.
and let's spend 2 pages with people running from an energy blast, and it's like 5 seconds worth if it were on a on a film medium or a cartoon. And here I think it works well.
Yeah.
And
it, like calling it the birth of widescreen comics, though, is like what we were talking about Ellis, where writers would come later and take the wrong things away from Ellis. I think they did the exact same thing with Bryan Hitch in this.
yes, I'm sure Ellis scripted things that way, so it's not just Bryan Hitch, it's the 2 of them collaborating.
Yeah.
And you're right, it's hard to recommend The Authority to anyone because nobody has done The Authority. People have taken various lessons, some of them better applied than others, and done things inspired by The Authority. And that's why it is, as several of us have said, it's a historical marker. This was a very influential thing, and you can see how it shaped the decade of comics that followed it. And you can get a certain amount of enjoyment out of it, but it's not, read this and you will be inspired and your heart will be touched.
Yeah, I actually have a really different outlook on this book because I never read Stormwatch. I will never read Stormwatch, probably. It's not, it doesn't really seem like something that I would be that into. And I probably will never read the follow-ups to The Authority, but I really enjoyed these issues. Like, I read the 12... The first trade is only 8, but I read, I think he did 12.
12.
Yeah,
12
I
issues,
read all 12 of them.
3 stories.
And
I did the same thing.
Yeah, and I just like had a blast, and I was like, that was great. Like it was just a good little superhero. It was like a cookie, like I just had a fun time reading it, and I don't really need it to be a part of a major universe. I like that it feels like part of a 3-act play that I'm only watching Act 2 of. And sometimes that's okay to not have caught Act 1 and Act 3. And as comic book readers, it's something we almost always do because how many of us start at Spider-Man, number 1 and read all
Amazing
the way up to-
Fantasy number 16.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
that's
right?
why.
There's nothing okay about you not reading Planetary. Like, that's not okay.
No, I've read Planetary.
Okay.
I read Planetary before
then
this.
It's okay. You don't have to read Stormwatch, but you
Okay.
have to read Planetary.
Right, but I mean, Planetary, I understand, is like Ellis's end to this trilogy, but it's not the end of the Authority arc.
No.
You know what I mean? So I'm like,
Right.
I won't read the Authority that comes after this. I've read Planetary.
The thing that stood out the most for me, though, was not specifically Bryan Hitch's pencils. Mm-hmm. It was the colors.
Yeah, it's very modern.
It's got an incredibly modern color that makes it feel... It doesn't feel like something from the 90s. It feels like something from like 2003.
Yeah.
And a long-ass time ago, we were talking about Empire. Mm-hmm. And we were trying to figure out when it was, and we eventually had to look it up. And it was a lot later than it felt like.
Right.
Partly because it had been worked on for a long time, but I think the colors had a lot to do with it and the way that it was colored. And I think that the color in the Authority plays a big part in making it feel the way that it does, and in that widescreen comics thing. Mm-hmm. It doesn't use a normal comics color palette. It feels a lot more realistic. This feels like you're watching a movie. Mm-hmm. And I think that the color is what creates that effect.
Yeah.
And so I think that is one of the most important and most overlooked elements about what makes the Authority so important. Because a lot of comics in the 2000s, in the last decade, switched to using that style.
Well, I don't think that was the Authority's influence. I think that was printing upgrades.
Well, yeah, for those of us who weren't reading in the 90s, I was, but for people who weren't reading in the 90s, something that was happening during the mid to late 90s into the early 2000s was the switch from, the older technology, printing and coloring, to this all digital style that we have now. And some people were really good at using digital effects to color, and some people were shit terrible at it. And so there were a lot of people in the comic book stores and that were reading comics at the time that were very opposed to digitally colored comics. Like, this was something that they were fighting against.
I don't know if I would say they were shit terrible as much as it was they were trying to use the old style with the new medium, and it just didn't work.
I think that there's like a lot of oversaturated books from the 90s. I think there's a lot of like poor color choice and palette, and I think something that happens when you're working with a limited color palette and limited technology is the people that really succeed in that are those that are extremely creative and can overcome the limitations of the color to make something interesting. But once you're given an infinite palette, almost, I mean, in print it isn't infinite, but there's a lot
It's
more.
like, what, 16 million colors?
It's insane. Yeah, there's so many. A near infinite palette. A lot of people are overwhelmed by that and aren't able to make as intelligent
Especially
choices.
if you've spent a lot of time training and building techniques and habits with the smaller color palette.
Right, and so
you got to relearn almost from scratch.
I've listened to a lot of interviews of colorists who have like moved from that Frisket airbrush era of cutting like actual shapes of Frisket out and airbrushing colors onto the board, moving into the digital era, and it was essentially just like they were just having to go back and relearn their art training.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that in the first issue of The Authority, the colorist is credited as Laura Dupuy of Wildstorm FX.
Mm-hmm. And Image had a lot to do, and specifically Wildstorm, which was Jim Lee's imprint at Image, sort of, at first, and then it left, and then DC bought them back, and it's complicated. But they have a lot to do with that modern era of coloring because they were all artists in Image, and that was something that they were really all about, was like moving comics into the future of the technology. Because graphic designers had been using more, computer technology probably sooner than comic book artists were able to get a hold of that print technology. So
I think A Killing Joke, you guys talked about it, is a perfect example of that, where the original format that came out, the colors were completely different, and then when they went back and recolored it, it really lost a lot of its character in my eyes.
yeah,
It's funny because I was thinking about that later, and I thought in the late 90s, Ted Turner wanted to colorize old black
moon.
and white movies.
Oh, I remember
wanted
that
to
whole
colorize
thing.
the moon.
He wanted to colorize, and it was specifically Casablanca that he wanted to colorize. And people lost their shit. And I didn't really get it then, but now it's...
Well,
it's interesting.
I remember when TNT was on early, and it was just full of those colorized movies,
Yeah.
and it was really crude
it was
and ugly.
awful.
one of the biggest-
looked fucking awful. It looked like you were having... It was that uncanny valley. It looked almost all right, but it was that little bit of not all right that just ruined your day.
And what's really funny is one of the biggest proponents against colorizing movies
was George Lucas. Yeah, because George Lucas would be like, he called it barbarianism to give somebody a movie and then to take it back and change it.
In his defense, I think that that's fair because these weren't the original directors and cinematographers.
Then again, George Lucas wasn't the original director for some of his movies, and he didn't have problems.
It's true.
I mean, I think what we're all trying to say is fuck George Lucas.
Well,
aside from the fact where he gave a bunch of land up for low.
That was just a fuck you to rich people.
That was hilarious, though.
I think that where I fall on that is it's fine for George Lucas to change his movies as long as he lets us have the old ones too.
Yeah,
we talked about that before.
And if Disney is smart, they'll release the old ones.
I think they will see
as a fuck you to George Lucas.
Yes.
Well,
no, not
I think
as a fuck you to George Lucas, but as a...
Disney does that thing with the vault that they do with their movies. I think at some point, out of the vault will come this giant 6-disc collector's edition of Star Wars.
And I would buy
next summer, probably right before
ones to get the original old ones.
And you'll be able to watch all of it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get that before the new Star Wars movies.
I bet you're right.
Yeah. So.
My daughter has never seen Star Wars, and that breaks my heart because I love those.
What is wrong with you?
Why haven't
Because I will not show her the new ones.
I have them on VHS. They're upstairs right now. I'm calling Child Protective Services.
You can go online
Joe,
and
you can borrow my VCR to watch these VHS.
You can get an HD German version of the movies where they cut out all the.
Really?
I have the ones that are.
It's been they actually redubbed it with the audio. So it's almost seamless.
Well,
and
the VHS that I have are the
really
digitally remastered in THX, but so like some of the explosions are a little bit better, but it's still.
You're talking about the VHS that came out in the early '90s.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have like multiple copies.
Yeah.
I
of the
remember
VHS,
there was one time they showed them on the Sci-Fi Channel where it wasn't the special editions because those hadn't come out yet, but they had like added in some footage that was taken out of the movie reel version, like a couple of really small scenes.
I think
just like
that's
certain
the
shots.
THX.
Okay, yeah,
I think it is.
But I remember them showing that, and we recorded it off the Sci-Fi Channel specifically so that we would have those.
Yeah,
it's funny. I just want to point out something. Everybody knows that I'm not talking about the prequels because we don't even acknowledge them.
Yes,
that's
very true.
Well, they also didn't edit those, so you can see the original still, Joe. Those are the only ones you can get.
Anyways.
Is there anything else that we want to say about the Authority?
I did. There is one more thing. Really quick. I'm with Chard on this. Like, the thing I love about this is that I think we have a tendency to talk about things in a very academic way because we're all,
critique is important.
And that's kind of what we do. The Authority is one of the few books that I have read multiple times and I can enjoy, not just on an intellectual level, but on a visceral level. Because there's just some cool shit that happens. And it's Jack Hawksmoor, right?
Yeah.
He's like one of my favorite comic characters of all time. It's like, I mean, I understand that there's kind of this idea of like a Spider-Man analog in there somewhere, as most of the other characters are analogs of other characters. But the idea that somebody exists in a city and can like, as part of that city, is tied into the nerve center of that city is such a cool thing. And I think it's something he explores a lot. I mean, I think pretty much you take out all those alien enhancements and you have Spider Jerusalem, right? Like the big thing about Spider Jerusalem is he's got to be in the city.
Kitty Pryde thrown in because he's like phasing through walls.
But like
more like he's merging.
There are moments in this, and unfortunately, even after Mark Millar's run on the Authority, they brought it back again, and it's awful. It's absolutely awful at that point. It's just they're missing it's not just that they're missing the point. It's just bad writing at that point. But I just have so much fun reading this and just like the Midnighter and his whole, I know what you're going to do. I've already fought this battle a million times in my head. I can hit you before you even see me.
The Bat God that we talked about now.
Authority is, among other things that it did well, it did the XP JLA well, whereas all the people inspired by it, most of them did the JLA-likes poorly.
Yeah.
I mean, because
absolutely.
Ellis managed to, instead of just having cheap Xerox copies of the JLA, actually thought about the characters and what made them important and managed to distill them down to their essential qualities.
Right.
Well, there's been so many books that are like, even Invincible, but there are so many books that are like, oh, here's a Batman-like archetypal character existing in this universe. Here's a Superman-like character existing in this universe. And this is the first time I've ever seen it done as well as it's been done.
Yeah, because
I read this and was like, man, I wish that other people would just like take the time to characterize their characters in the way that Ellis does. Because having not read Stormwatch, this was my first introduction to some of these characters, and they're great. I mean, you don't need anything else in this. Like, he's able to convey everything he needs. The writing is excellent. It's a great ride. It reads really easily. It's fun to read along. The art is beautiful. The colors are phenomenal. Like, it's just a really well put together package.
Absolutely.
It's like Die Hard. You just like to watch it over and over again. It may
and
not be
that's
the best
exactly
thing ever,
what I would
but-
describe it to.
And that's
it's
why
fun because it's not fun to turn Batman up to 11 and he's still Batman. It's only fun to turn Batman up to 11 if he's going to be like ripping the hearts out of people and kicking 18 people at once and you know, like,
well,
and this is what's great about it is that it's not, doesn't just be like, oh, the most important thing is their power set. It's like, no, it's what drives them and what they're willing to do. And when you get past that point, you've earned it, right? And this is what we always talk about.
I want to take your point and restate it so that it becomes my point.
As long as you've state that it was my point
I think that
first.
you're right that we have a tendency to go like, oh, Warren Ellis, he always does the hard ass, the badass, and look at the elements of the story and not acknowledge Warren Ellis is a really good writer.
Yeah,
I mean, he could legitimately write, I think, anything within the comics universe and do a good job. He doesn't always, Ministry of Space, but he has that ability.
Matt likes Ministry of Space.
I like Ministry of Space.
It has fate. I mean, like, he always writes something for somebody.
Right. But at the end of the day, The Authority is just a really good comic.
Yeah.
It's fun to read.
Yeah, and
it's got a lot of awesome stuff.
And
they fight and kill God.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I didn't understand what they meant by widescreen comics when that was thrown around in the modern era. They're like, oh, the widescreen comics, and this is the birth of widescreen comics. I didn't get it
And reading
until I read this, and I was like, oh.
This is what they were all trying for and missing.
Exactly. It's like, this is the fun action movie that we talk about that is just a sweet ride.
Yeah, I mean,
like, it's fun.
We were talking before we started the podcast about Top Gun.
Right.
And how, like, you can't do a riff track for that because it's already a perfect movie. Like, it just is what it is, and you can't change it.
Homoerotic movie.
It's so ridiculous. I watched it not that long ago.
Oh, I
and
can't watch
like
it.
a week
I
ago.
Really?
I can't.
I hadn't seen it in years, and I was like, "What is this?"
Actually,
it actually makes me confused now.
it is. No, it's very confusing.
It's different when you watch it when you're 12 and then you watch it.
Yeah, well, when you're 12,
Oh, no,
you're
when
like
you're 12,
fucking
it's
sweet
like
airplanes
crack and boobs and everything that
man.
is good.
Yeah.
and
like
abs
a
and just
candy bar.
dudes
It's
made of
just-
abs.
And then you watch it later and you're like,
Dude, abs.
why are they
The
all
pecs.
shirtless?
Yeah,
the
pecs
Why are
too,
they
in their
all
arms when they're
shirtless
looking
and
at their
glistening?
watches.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I actually posited the question and
I thought you were gonna say you pause it during the volleyball
I
scene.
paused
I was
it
like,
during
me
the
too.
There just aren't enough movies
No,
about hunks.
My question is, what does it say about me that I prefer the movies of Tony Scott to the movies of Ridley Scott? Maybe that will promote some discussion somewhere. I don't even know.
right.
I want somebody to give me shit about that. Nobody's doing it.
Are we ready to move on to recommendations?
Yeah, I think we talked about.
I mean, just one last note.
Yeah, do it.
Let me be clear when I say that of my favorite Warren Ellis stuff, this is one of my least favorite, which means that it's still really good.
Right.
And it's hard for me to take myself out of the place of judging it a little bit because I feel like a lot of what's going on with DC right now is a direct result of DC
Absolutely.
going,
Which is-
whoa, people like this stuff.
Yeah.
Let's bring this into, and this was never meant to be in the DC universe.
totally
And the
missed out.
hilarious
Like,
thing
they
about
just-
that is that
missed
they're
the mark.
redoing Stormwatch
Yeah.
and they're fucking it up too.
Yeah.
They can't even do
I
that
just-
right.
Yeah.
Well,
So I mean,
it's just like in the 90s, you know, the story goes that in the 90s, after all the people left to do Image, the people in charge of Marvel said, I don't get Image, but it's popular, so give me more stuff like that.
Right.
And the creators were like, but the Image stuff is shit. You want us to do shit? Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what Marvel did in the 90s. And now
Bob Harris.
Yes.
Yeah, and
as
Bob
you
Harris,
say,
who's going to release Maximum Carnage DC style.
And
I forgot that I wanted to say this. My first impression reading this was, oh my god, this is the new 52, but it doesn't suck.
I think that that's a great parallel because something that people complain about in the New 52 is how much of a dick Superman is and how like poorly written he is and how poor his books are. And you can do a more serious tone with a Superman type character without just making him an asshole.
exactly.
And
That's what later Authority turned into.
Right.
And I mean, if you read the actual Ellis Authority, I mean, Midnighter is a JLA level Batman, and he is nasty as shit, but he's a nice guy.
he has a
Apollo
heart.
is a nicer guy, and they're a cute couple.
Yeah, there's underneath the
Spoiler!
layers. Well, underneath the layers of badass, there's got to be a heart in there.
Yeah.
Why else
Otherwise,
would you do this?
cannot
Yeah.
care about
No,
that
absolutely.
character.
And
And
that's-
why else would they be a superhero?
I picked up Stormwatch New 52, and I'm like, well, maybe they didn't, and I knew it. There was that voice in my head going, why are you doing
Joe,
this?
what are you doing?
And I'm
What are
like,
you
you know
doing? Don't
what?
do it.
I'm not gonna. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be that. Like, I'm giving people shit. Like, and to segue a little bit, I think right now we live in an era where it's really cool to like Batman and it's really cool to hate Superman. And so I'm forever telling people, and people will be like, well, Superman's stupid. And I'm like, how many Superman comics have you read? They go, none. I say, shut your fucking mouth, because you don't know. You don't know. Like, you didn't read, you can't just go onto cracked.com and read an article and that makes you an expert on Superman. You don't know what you're talking about, all right? And
My main problem is that DC's attitude is what makes Superman an uninteresting character is that he
that
wears
he's
his
a nice
underwear
guy.
on the outside.
Shit, well,
So if we
shit
just
like
take
that.
off the red underoos, he'll be a better character.
Yeah, and so
And that has nothing to do with anything.
Well, and they're just making him into a dick, which is like the opposite of
Well,
what makes Superman interesting.
Yeah.
like what Adam was saying, they see the surface details and they
Right.
miss what's
Yeah,
underneath.
exactly.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more.
But and so I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be the guy that's like, well, all of the New 52 sucks. So I've tried it here and there, and I found some good stuff that nobody's paying attention to, which is why it's good.
We're gonna talk a bit more about the New
But,
52
Demonites,
in
maybe.
detail.
So I'm like, well, maybe Stormwatch. You know, it's not a big budget title, right? They've thrown Martial Manhunter on there, but I'll give
And
it a
the,
chance.
and the
I'm
writer
gonna give
did
it-
good stuff on like Captain Britain and whatever.
MI-13.
Yeah,
So
whatever. it's called, which was good.
I went into it open-minded, and it really was. It was like reading it when it was just they had no idea what they were talking about, what they were doing, and all they ended up doing was corrupting these characters and making them. It's like at one point, Midnighter comes up to Apollo and he's like, "I don't work with the Authority, and I want to kill people. Do you want to kill people too?" And Apollo's like, "Well, I don't know who to join," and it's just like. What the fuck is this? It's not a story in any way, shape, or form. It's
Yeah.
just like use these characters to do this, but do it within this framework. And it's like, well, you've broken it. You've
What I
broken
think
it. It won't work now.
was interesting too, and then this is probably a discussion for another day. But when the Ultimate line launched at Marvel and they did Ultimates, imagine if that had been their Avengers and it hadn't been an Ultimates line.
Yeah.
You know, like that replaced all the books that you
No
love,
dice.
Right.
And was like, you know, some people have fond memories of the Ultimates. I think it's interesting. I don't know that I would say I have fond memories of it, but some people hate it, and for good reason. But the nice thing that Marvel did was they gave you your safe, comfortable universe to
Your
live in as well.
quarantine test
Yeah,
lab.
This is
right.
a total tangent, but it amazes me when people talk about multiverses, they always think about DC, when DC has a shitty fucking multiverse.
Agreed.
But Marvel has been able to do it for decades without ever fucking things up, because they've
Right.
got their 616 universe, but then they've got Age of Apocalypse in 2099 and M2
Future
and the
Imperfect
Ultimates and
and
like
Old Man Logan and like
well,
all these
not just like
feature-
one-off stories, but entire lines
Yeah.
with a completely separate continuity with the same or very similar characters. And it's like, okay, we have this thing and we're doing that, and you can have that if you want, but then you can have the old style too.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
is
and
how
that's
you
the
do
And
it.
those
Both
things
worlds
can
DC.
and those
Yeah.
things
Yeah,
can
right.
live side by side.
Right, you
No,
can
and it
have
doesn't
your-
because
cause
then they'll
problems.
bring it back and they'll fuck that up
Well,
too.
but it's essentially like you can have your cake and eat it too.
Okay,
With Marvel,
but to
Exactly.
be fair,
you
there's
get
a shit ton
Exiles.
of horrible.
Elseworlds?
Elseworlds.
Oh,
Oh no,
for
they're
sure.
not.
But you
I
gotta
would say
sift
the
through the shit
majority
of
them
anything.
are pretty
but,
bad, but it's what they represent, right?
Yeah,
No,
it's-
and that's
it
true.
represents creative freedom.
Exactly.
and it's not the fuck your house style, DC, like we say every week.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's where you get interesting stories is when you let writers be writers and creators be creative.
Hashtag not my DCU.
I hate you so much.
Okay, let's
do
move on to
recommendations.
Rex
Okay,
before
so
we can fall
recommendations.
completely
Okay,
down the road.
I would like to start with recommendations
Go for it.
because
You
mine.
gotta fight me for it.
I just knocked Joe's hat off. Sorry, this isn't a
Shut
video
it
show.
down now.
He's going to lose all of his heat.
It's
I
okay.
am going to lose.
You don't lose. Never mind. I
Okay,
don't want to
so
science this.
We are not friends.
so I'm glad that I was not asked who I would recommend this to for the Authority, because I do not know who I would recommend the Authority to. I just really don't know.
Murder hobos.
But then when I think, if you liked the Authority, what would you like? And that brought me to my recommendation this week, which is Outsiders by Judd Winnick. And it drew a lot of parallels to this book for me, because when you read The Authority, you can tell that Warren Ellis really loves these characters that he's doing. I mean, he created most of them. And I kind of feel that way about this book as well. Judd Winnick really loves the characters that he's writing on The Outsiders, including Roy Harper. He turned Roy Harper into one of my favorites.
Yeah, buddy.
Which I'm actually, in a couple weeks, going to recommend another book with him in it.
I hope it's not the one where they, spoilers, take his arm off. Right? Isn't that Roy?
That does happen to Roy.
Yeah, that's definitely a Roy thing.
Yeah. I
I
hope
don't
it's
know
not
when
that
that
one.
Then it turns into
does.
an
I don't think it is.
Not good.
It's Requiem for an Archer. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That doesn't bad trick. I apologize.
But yeah, this is one that I really... I thought about a lot when I was reading The Authority, and it was just one that I wanted to say, if you liked The Authority, I mean, give this a shot. You might not like it. You might... it's got some good moments in it, and it's just... I mean, really, when I read it, I can tell that he loves the characters, and that's one of the things that made The Authority good for me.
I like it. It's basically a we're getting the band back together story in this first arc, but instead of like them falling out over so and so's drug problem, they like the drummer and the bassist died, and everybody's kind of scarred by that.
And it's got Scott Hanna as one of the inkers, who is actually one of my favorite inkers.
Yeah,
Nice.
I mean, it's great. It looks
Yeah.
great. Matthew Williams does the art on it. Is that his name?
There's a number of people.
Yeah,
Tom
there-
Rainey, Chris Cross, and Ivan Race are credited as pencilers. Scott Hanna, Sean Parsons, and Mark Campos are credited as inkers.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, it's a fun story with a lot of fun, underused DC characters. So.
And it's got Grodd in it, so I mean,
Yep.
Well, that's because Judd Winnick loves his monkeys. When he
Especially
wrote,
telepathic apes.
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
he wrote Barry Ween,
Ween.
he's like, if we just start putting monkeys on the cover, it's gonna sell.
it's one of the rules. It's one of the rules of publishing.
The unwritten rules.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Marvel uses
Bikini
that.
girls, monkeys, and there's one other thing that.
Wolverine.
Well,
He's
I
a
wouldn't say Wolverine
monkey.
as much as I just say claws.
Claws.
yeah,
Yeah.
claws will work. I'll give you claws.
Wolverine's as hairy as a monkey,
Yeah.
so it works.
That's
You
true.
can't shave
That's
fast
true.
enough. It
I
just
mean, Wolverines are
regenerates.
pretty much just like. Anyways, I'm not even gonna finish that.
Technically, I guess that's true because you never see him bald, even like when he gets his head blown off
Well, you see him like bald for
like a second.
yeah, moment, literally.
You know, I
minutes.
I guess his hair does regenerate.
Which means that his hairdo is also genetic.
Yeah. Oh, Wolverine, the
Never
best
thought-
character.
He uses so much product. He owns stock in the company, man. You know that.
So, you want to go next, Matt?
Sure, yeah. I brought Supermarket by Bryan Wood and Kristen Donaldson. Essentially, the reason I picked it up was because I work at a grocery store, and it was called Supermarket, and it's written by Bryan Wood, and I love Bryan Wood in most cases. It's without going too far into it, it's basically a story set in the future where everything's pretty much owned by corporations and the mega rich. It plays off a character type that I really like that Charles talked about before. It's the teenagers. It's the main character is a 16-year-old girl, and she's kind of snarky. But you really she starts out really abrasive, and you can really kind of grow to like her. She becomes a much more sympathetic character. She essentially is the heir to a lot of money, and there's hitmen that are sent out to kind of kill her from the Yakuza, and she kind of has to sift her way through this universe. It's well written. The color palette is a little. I don't know the right word. It's
Muted?
Stylized.
yeah, stylized.
The art is stylized and the palette is muted.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, it's
That's
it's colorful, but at the same time, it's not like overly saturated.
Yeah.
And it's printed on non-gloss paper,
Which I really
so
like.
it
The
really
matte paper is
it really
awesome.
helps.
It's kind of a cool, different story. It's pretty well written, and it's something that I think kind of flew under the radar. So
Cool.
All right.
So I swear that I brought this before, but it wasn't on the reading list, so I'm going to pitch it again.
You definitely have not brought
Okay.
this before.
Probably
So-
because I had it for like 6 months.
That is true. That did happen. I think I wanted to pitch it, and you wouldn't give it back to me.
Or
no, you couldn't find
for
it.
the longest time, and it was actually just on top of my shelf under something else.
Anyway, I am pitching The Hedge Knight by George Martin. If you're familiar with Game of Thrones, George Martin wrote a series of short stories set 100 years earlier in Westeros about this knight named Duncan the Tall and his squire Egg. And this is a graphic adaptation of the first of those short stories called The Hedge Knight, where basically he's this squire to the knight, Duncan is, and the knight dies on the first page. And Duncan's like, I guess I'm a knight now? I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to go to this tournament, and I'm going to try and win, and I'll get a name for myself, and maybe some lord will want to take me on as like a hired knight or whatever. And he starts fucking things up, and terrible things happen, and he ends up in a tournament to the death, and it's a lot of fun. It's Game of Thrones. If you read the books, there are some oblique references to this story. There's also been a follow-up from the second short story that he wrote called Sworn Sword. But I guess this is long enough that we only have to read one. 2 would be a little bit too much.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
But yeah, it's a lot of fun. The art is really cool. It's very colorful. And if you like Game of Thrones, you know what you're getting into.
Yeah, and it's something that George R. R. Martin does really well is write the relationships between like knights and the knightly games and lords and stuff. I always find really interesting.
Yeah, and actually one of the things I really love about this edition that I have, which was published by Devil's Due Publishing, because the later ones are by Marvel, and this was reprinted by Marvel. But in this edition, at least, it's actually got a guide in the back of the book to the crests of all of the different houses that are talked about.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which I referenced frequently when I was reading the books themselves, because he describes them, but you don't necessarily know what they look like.
Nice.
Unless you understand the lingo for, rampant and what that actually means.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's just a cool little guide that I found really helpful.
Yeah, I love stuff like that and maps.
Maps are good.
So if you like Game of Thrones, it's more of that, and it's a good comic book.
All right.
For me, inspired by important works of the late 90s, I want to pitch Kurt Busiek's Thunderbolts 1 through 12.
Oh, nice.
It's not quite as influential as Authority, but it's something that definitely made a mark and started a bunch of characters that have become quite popular. In a nutshell, this is during the Heroes Reborn year when the Avengers and the Fantastic Four are off the table.
Yeah, this actually starts right after Onslaught has destroyed New York.
And the Masters of Evil, a bunch of supervillains, get the idea of running a long con of introducing themselves as a new replacement superhero team to fill the gap left. And only once they're in it, they are faced with the horrible temptations of popularity, respect, and success. And the first year, which ends with the heroes coming back and the trigger getting pulled, are mostly focused on the different members of this supervillains pretending to be superheroes team and how they're dealing with these various temptations and the change in their lifestyle. And among other things, what really stands out for me is that unlike other later books that have been set from the antagonist's point of view, these aren't a bunch of sad sack career criminals who happen to have superpowers. These aren't psychopaths running around doing crazy shit. These are supervillains. I mean, it's Kurt Busiek, Astro City guy. And this is the most Astro City thing he ever did for Marvel. And only it is Marvel. And
Nice.
it's not Astro City. And it's really interesting look at these characters, and it's also where, some of these characters have been very enduring and become fan favorites, and it's where it all got started. And I think it's both a fun read and a this is where it came from.
Cool.
Nice. All right, Joe, what you got?
Well, I was listening to one of our podcasts, and we were talking about how we don't recommend a lot of manga, and I'm just started back to school this quarter, and I'm kind of dealing with a bunch of stuff, and so I didn't really think about what to bring, and I saw this on my shelf, and I'm like, I'm going to bring the shit out of this, and also get as far away from the authority as I can possibly go. So I brought the omnibus. I don't know that we would read the whole thing, but it's Azumanga Daioh, which is...
It's a surprisingly quick read.
It is
Yeah.
a surprisingly
It's
quick read.
4-panel strips, isn't it?
Well, I mean,
at
not
first.
really, but it flows really well. I mean...
Oh, well, a lot of them are the 4-panel
Yeah.
Yeah.
weekly, not weekly, but daily strips. I mean,
Yeah.
I've read, haven't looked at this one particularly. I've looked at a number of different comedy mangas where, it bounces between the 4-panel strips and the occasional more traditional page stories.
Yeah, it's much more like it's four volumes of the manga, and it's much more like the first volume of Invincible, or Empowered, where your stories are lasting 4 to 5 pages.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the story of 6 high school girls, one of which is 10 years old and a gifted student, because you need to have that. And it's just like kind of a slice of life, but it's also bordering on the surreal. And it's just got great characters in it. It's one of the few things I've read that
It's one of the few mangas that made me laugh out loud.
It's very funny.
Normally I'm like, oh, that was hilarious, but this really makes me laugh out loud, and it's also really touching at times, and
Yeah.
it's just so much fun. And
Yeah.
the great thing about it is that it's all ages. Like
Yeah.
you can really.
And it's not all ages as code word for this is little kids. It's
No,
all
no.
ages as in anybody can sit down
Pick
and read
this up
this
and
and
read
find
it.
it hilarious.
Yeah, it's my favorite anime.
Yeah, it's
Which
one of
I
mine.
don't hesitate to say, because
No, it's-
it's just like, it's too good, it's too cute, it's too funny. And we talk about manga having strong female characters a lot.
Oh,
This book essentially only has female characters.
Yeah, yeah.
There's
Well,
one male
there's
character I can
Mr.
remember.
There's
There's Mr. Takeichi?
No, Kimura, who's the pervert,
No.
and
The dog.
Mr. Tadakichi,
Mr. Tadakichi.
who
Yeah.
is this huge
White
It's a
dog.
huge yellow
white-
lab.
I don't think he is a yellow lab. He might be a yellow lab.
He's a big cuddly dog.
He's a
Yeah.
big cuddly dog, which ties into a lot of things, and
surprisingly more important than you would think.
yeah, and I mean, it's really about the relationship of these 6 girls. First it's 5, and then
A transfer student shows up.
well, she's from one of the other. It's originally
Oh,
4,
right,
and then
right.
this transfer student who they nickname Osaka because she's from Osaka. And in the translation, they give her a New York accent to denote the fact that she speaks Japanese with an Osakan accent.
Right. She's
And
my
then-
favorite character.
Yeah, no, she's a great
so
character.
fucking dumb.
And then they get a student from one of the other classes who's Sakaki, who's the who's the athletic one, is her main rival. But it's so much fun
It's
to
a great-
read, and
yeah.
it's a pleasure to read.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I just thought it would be a lot of fun to read.
Yeah.
So
It's super adorable. If
it
you like
really,
manga.
really is, and it doesn't feel. I feel like the humor is fairly universal, which is, I think, Japanese humor is pretty hit or miss, in the way that a lot of cultural humor is, and this is.
It's actually kind of funny to me because apparently in Japan, the term an American joke means a joke that isn't funny.
Which makes sense.
It does.
Big Bang Theory.
My favorite, one of my favorite jokes in this book. I'll just kind of give you a preview of what it's like. But Osaka is asking the teacher if she's been to America before, and the teacher's like, "Oh yeah, of course I've been to America." And they start talking, and Osaka just keeps coming up with essentially a grosser and grosser situation that could happen, which is in America, you're allowed to wear your shoes inside of people's houses. And so the teacher's like, yeah, that's true, that happens. And then Osaka is like, well, what if you get dog poop on your shoe, and then you walk into someone's house and you get dog poop on the carpet, and then like just keeps making this whole, big mess of everything. And both Osaka's face and the teacher's face just get more and more horrified as the panels go on.
No, it's great.
And it's just like this really weird joke about like this weird cultural situation that they like can't imagine, but when they imagine it, they're like, what's so
Yeah,
weird?
it seems like a lot of the jokes don't necessarily have punchlines. They're just kind of like absurd situations or odd commentary that's just funny because of what it is.
Yeah.
What's her face? Tomo, who isn't there's I might be mixing it up with the anime, but isn't there's a part in this where she gains the power of everybody in the class, but then she gains somebody's ability to be late all the time, so she can never use them. It's just like stuff like this. It's very fanciful. That's what I wanted to use.
But total slice of life, really good.
It's so good.
If you, I recommend it. I
you're
think you
looking-
should. If you can't find it and you can't find the time to read it, maybe try watching the show too.
Yeah, check out the anime. It's
really funny.
incredibly approachable, easy to watch. You can watch it with your kids if you have
Only
little
like
ones.
26 episodes, and it's really well done.
Yeah, and it's just so much fun.
Awesome.
All right. This week I brought a book called Lazarus by Greg Rucka and is it Matthew Lark. It's the artist, Michael Lark.
Is the trade out already?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just came out.
It came
on
out
Wednesday.
yesterday.
Okay.
And it's a story set in the future where these different families are sort of vying for supremacy throughout the global. It's not really clear, like how far.
I don't think they've really gone into.
Yeah,
how far it is
what's
yet.
really cool about the series is there's a lot left unanswered, even at the end of these 5 issues. Is like you're kind of learning about the world as it goes along, so there's a lot of great world building. And I don't want to ruin a lot of that environment for everybody, but suffice it to say, it's kind of an interfamily drama that reminds me a little bit of like Vampire Family interfamily drama, sort of like Fight Club, which we've talked about, and just like good kind of lineage like that. And what's really interesting is each family essentially has what they call a Lazarus, which is their hand, who like applies the justice for that family essentially, and like defends against other families, and so they are immortal. They come back from being killed, as far as we know, and so they are. There's some super sciencey stuff going on here, but it quickly comes out that there's a lot more to the story than we see, and the Lazarus for the specific family that it focuses on is kind of stuck into this weird drama power play with her brother, and her dad are both fighting for the power of control of the family, and she sort of feels like an outsider as the Lazarus, and you kind of find out why that is.
So it's not that they don't age; it's that they can come back from death.
It's that they come back from death. They are all, through the act of science, much older than they are also, but not the Lazarus. She's actually, I think, only like 18 or 20. It turns out in the story, like she's not very old, but her dad is like really old, and her brother's like 60 or 80 or something. But he looks like he's in his like late 30s, early 40s. So there is like, because they're a high power family, they have access to all the super science.
Okay.
So, and everybody else that isn't part of the family that just lives on their land is called the Waste. Huh. So it kind of shows you what kind of like dystopian society is going on in the future, and
There's a little bit of commentary in there.
yeah, it's
Just a little.
It's really interesting. It's Greg Rucka doing what he does best, writing kick-ass comics, and
Super strong, complex.
yeah, the art's
characters.
Yeah, the art's fantastic. Yeah, he does have a reputation for writing, great female characters, but so far what I've read in this book is like every character is just really interesting. So yeah, I think the book's really good. I think you should read it. I'm going to keep reading the series. It's pretty fun. The art's great. I don't know. You
Awesome.
guys can pass it around. What do you guys think?
That is good. Michael Lark, he did something else that we've talked about.
Well, he's on Gotham Central, I think.
Oh, yeah, Michael Lark.
And he did some for Captain America. I believe he did the flashback scenes in Brubaker's run on Captain America.
He did.
I think.
He did.
Sleep. Did he do Sleeper?
No, not
No.
Sleeper. I'm trying to think. It was a book that I pitched.
Incognito.
Incognito, yep.
That's what I was thinking of.
He also has done some Elseworlds Batman stories and stuff. So he's a great artist. I really like it. It's a bit what I would call like a sketcher looser style, but it like fits really well with the way that it's inked and colored. So, Toby, what do you want to read?
God, I'm torn. I really want to read everything that's been pitched this week that I haven't read. But I'm going to vote for Supermarket because DMZ has been pitched twice and we haven't picked it. And so I want to read something by Brian Wood.
Cool.
So I'm going with Supermarket.
All right. Matt, what do you want to read?
I'm going to go with the manga. I don't remember what it's called.
Azumanga Daioh.
Yeah. You guys pitched it with such fervor. I
Yeah,
want to laugh.
it's
I
really fun.
I haven't read a comic and laughed in a while. So.
All right, so I came in today. I wanted to vote for something that wasn't super based, and we have a shit ton of stuff that's not super based. So that's.
I think you and me were the only ones who pitched ones that were.
Yeah, I mean, and mine was mainly just a recommendation for if you liked this, then read this. And so I'm glad that I have such a huge choice here. After coming in knowing
You're stalling for time.
No, I'm gonna vote for Supermarket because it's been on my watch list, and Brian Wood, old friend of mine from Wolcott, Vermont, so gotta give him a shout out and vote for that.
Joe?
I'm going to vote for Supermarket and make it a lock.
Sweet. I thought I did a horrible job pitching it. So that's cool.
No, I was already going to. As soon I was intrigued.
Well, just for the record, what are you voting for, Adam?
Yeah, Adam.
Doesn't. I may not be here next time, but that's okay. You guys already decided. I'm going to vote for Lazarus just because Supermarket.
Well, Lazarus does deserve votes, so
Yeah, Supermarket. It
good
doesn't
to-
quite look like my thing. So.
What? You don't love 16-year-old girls as much as we do?
No, that's
Hey man,
legit.
I'm an old man. I'm going to be 35 this month. 16 feels like ew, squicky.
Yeah.
Chard.
Oh, man. Well,
Just for the record.
Yeah, I think... I mean, I pitched Azumanga Daioh pretty hard. I've read that. I actually just gave that back to Joe, the omnibus, a few days ago.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to pick the Hedge Knight. Because
Awesome.
I have never read that, and I've read all the Song of Ice and Fire books, and I've seen it a couple times. I've read some of his short stories. I really like the way he writes, so I'd love to see how it's adapted to comics, so I'll probably pick that up later anyway.
Cool.
All right.
All right, so next time, Supermarket.
Brian Wood.
You vote for something.
Yeah, I voted first.
voted
I voted for
first.
Supermarket.
All right. And thanks for listening, guys. Give us a iTunes review, like us on Facebook.
Thank you for
Follow
having
us.
me.
Yeah.
Check out our YouTube page where you can listen to all the same episodes.
Yeah.
Oh, also,
and sub to that because we'll probably have video episodes coming up in the somewhat near future. We're working on it.
Yeah, it's something we're thinking
working on
about.
it. All right, Matt, what you got?
totally side note, but if you've listened to our podcasts and you like Warren Ellis as much as we do, there's a documentary that's called Captured Ghosts, I believe. It's essentially interviews with Warren Ellis and then interviews with people like Matt Fraction and Grant Morrison, all kind of talking about his influence in comics. And it's somewhat self-masturbatory at points, but it's Warren Ellis. But what I will say is it's really cool because it kind of paints him in a different light. He talks a lot about his daughter and things like that. And it was something that I just kind of found on a whim and watched it. And it's only about an hour and 10 minutes, and it's really cool. So
Cool. Awesome.
check it out.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you next time for Supermarket.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.